Imagine this. One night you wake in the stillness of your room, yet the silence is not peaceful. It is heavy, so heavy it feels as though the walls themselves are pressing in on you. Nothing external has changed. The same bed, the same air, the same familiar shadows. And yet, within you, there is a presence, something you have avoided, denied, buried beneath layers of busyness and distraction. You try to turn away, but it follows. You close your eyes, but it lingers. You feel it whispering, not from outside, but from within. This is not the monster under your bed. This is the monster inside your soul. For all our progress, for all our talk of self-love, confidence and positivity, there is something we fear more than failure, more than death itself: to face our own darkness. We live in an age obsessed with light, bright screens, instant pleasures, the constant demand to appear happy, productive, successful. But what happens to the parts of us that don't fit that image? The anger we suppress, the envy we deny, the trauma we refuse to examine, the desires we bury because they seem shameful. They do not disappear. They wait. They fester. They become the silent architects of our choices. Carl Jung warned us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. But who among us truly dares to look into that abyss? Think of the contradictions we live with. We say we want peace, yet we avoid the conflicts within us. We say we want freedom, yet we remain chained by habits we cannot explain. We say we want love, yet we sabotage relationships without knowing why. Could it be that our darkness, the very thing we avoid, holds the answers we claim to seek? But to face it is terrifying. What if we discover we are not as good as we pretend to be? What if beneath the surface of our carefully curated identities lies something brutal, something primitive, something monstrous? And yet, is it possible that in this darkness lies not just danger but liberation? That the parts of ourselves we exile, the rage, the fear, the shadow, are not merely destructive, but also hold the keys to our strength, creativity, and authenticity? History and philosophy whisper this paradox again and again. The Greek myth of Theseus reminds us that the treasure is hidden in the labyrinth guarded by the Minotaur. Nietzsche tells us we must have chaos within to give birth to a dancing star. Even Dostoevsky, in his darkest novels, insists that true humanity is revealed only when we wrestle with our demons. So the question stands, have we, in our pursuit of comfort and light, forgotten the ancient art of confronting our own darkness? Imagine how different life would be if instead of running, you turned toward it. If instead of fearing the shadow, you allowed it to teach you. What would you discover about yourself? What power, what truth, what raw vitality lies hidden in the places you have refused to go? But be warned, to face your darkness is not a casual self-help exercise. It is not journaling with scented candles or repeating affirmations in the mirror. It is brutal, humbling, and raw. It will demand that you dismantle illusions, that you admit truths you have long denied, that you confront the parts of yourself you despise. It is not safe, but perhaps that is exactly why it is necessary. Because the alternative is not safety either. The alternative is to let your darkness rule you from the shadows, to let it sabotage your relationships, dictate your fears, consume your potential, while you remain blind to its power. And so we arrive at the great question: what happens to a human soul that forgets the art of facing its own darkness? Does it remain trapped in mediocrity, enslaved to hidden forces? Does it decay under the weight of repression? Or does it find a way, through courage and confrontation, to turn that darkness into fuel for transformation? This is not a question you can answer by logic alone. It is a question that must be lived, wrestled with, felt in your bones. And to explore it, we must first uncover the hidden roots, the psychological and philosophical forces, that make this avoidance so universal, so seductive, and yet so destructive. Why do we fear our own darkness so much? Why is it that, in a world overflowing with therapy apps, motivational talks, and self-help slogans, the most essential task, facing the shadow, remains forgotten, avoided, and denied? The answer is layered, woven into psychology, philosophy, and the silent conditioning of society itself. Jung and the shadow. We refuse. Carl Jung devoted much of his life to describing the shadow, the repressed, denied aspects of ourselves that we exile into the unconscious. These are not only the obvious sins, anger, greed, lust, but also the traits we secretly envy, the truths we fear, the parts of ourselves that conflict with our carefully polished image. The problem is not that we have a shadow. It is that we refuse to face it. By rejecting these elements, we believe we've rid ourselves of them. But Jung warned us that the opposite is true. What we suppress becomes stronger. The unacknowledged shadow directs our behaviors in secret, causing us to act against our own conscious intentions. We sabotage ourselves, hurt others, and repeat cycles we do not understand, all because we lack the courage to look inward. This is why Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." What we avoid within ourselves returns to us as destiny. Nietzsche and the fear of chaos. Friedrich Nietzsche saw the human being as a battlefield between order and chaos. He believed that within us lies a necessary chaos, a wellspring of vitality, creativity, and transformation. But this chaos is frightening, for it feels uncontrollable. To maintain safety, we construct rigid systems, moral codes, social rules, identities we cling to. These keep the chaos at bay, but they also limit us. Nietzsche warned that too much order leads to mediocrity, conformity, and stagnation. Only by embracing the chaos within, our darkness, can we give birth to what he called a dancing star, a new creation, a higher version of ourselves. Yet here is the paradox. We long for greatness, but we fear the chaos that makes it possible. And so we settle for comfort, for the last man who avoids risk, avoids darkness, avoids truth. Schopenhauer and the will we deny. Arthur Schopenhauer painted a bleak picture of life, driven endlessly by the will, that blind, insatiable force of desire and survival. To him, much of our suffering comes from this ceaseless striving. But notice what we do in modern times. Instead of confronting this restless will, we drown it in distractions. We hide from our dissatisfaction with entertainment, consumption, or shallow pleasures. We deny the will, yet in denying it, we do not eliminate it. It resurfaces as anxiety, addiction, and quiet despair. Our unwillingness to face our primal drives becomes another way of being controlled by them. Sartre and the flight from freedom. Jean-Paul Sartre saw another layer to the problem, the human tendency to flee from freedom. He argued that true freedom is terrifying because it forces us to recognize our responsibility. To face our darkness is to admit that we are not just victims of circumstance, but creators of our own choices, even the destructive ones. But responsibility is heavy, so we look away. We blame others, we cling to identities, we let society define us. This evasion of our darkness is, in Sartre's terms, bad faith, a refusal to live authentically. Society's role in the denial of darkness. It would be one thing if this avoidance were only personal, but society reinforces it at every turn. Modern culture thrives on appearances. We are trained to present curated versions of ourselves, successful, happy, productive, attractive. Social media amplifies this performance. To admit to our darkness, our envy, our despair, our rage, feels shameful, dangerous. Consumer culture too profits from our refusal. Instead of confronting dissatisfaction, we are encouraged to purchase distractions, a new gadget, a new diet, a new lifestyle. Each product whispers the same lie. You can escape your darkness by buying this. But the darkness does not vanish. It waits, patient, beneath the glittering surface. Even institutions avoid it. Schools teach us skills but rarely how to confront our fears. Workplaces demand productivity, but not self-reflection. Religions sometimes soothe with promises of light, while discouraging exploration of the shadow. Everywhere, the message is clear. Hide your darkness, smile, perform, pretend. The psychological trap. The consequence of all this avoidance is what psychologists call repression. When feelings, instincts, and truths are pushed into the unconscious, they do not disappear. They find other ways out. Sometimes as projection, seeing in others what we refuse to see in ourselves. Sometimes as neurosis, addiction, self-sabotage, or unexplained despair. We think we have silenced the darkness, but really it has simply changed masks. The forgotten art. In ancient times, facing darkness was not forgotten. Myths, rituals, and initiation rites often required a descent into caves, underworlds, or wilderness. Heroes did not become heroes by avoiding their darkness. They became heroes by confronting it. Think of Odysseus descending into Hades, of Christ in the desert, of shamans facing visions induced by solitude or ordeal. These journeys symbolize a universal truth: to be whole, you must go down before you rise. But modern culture, in its obsession with progress and positivity, has lost this wisdom. We celebrate ascent without descent, light without shadow. We have forgotten the art of facing the dark. The unresolved tension, and so the hidden problem becomes clear. We are at war with ourselves, but we refuse to fight the battle directly. We distract, we deny, we repress. But the shadow grows stronger in the dark. This avoidance explains why so many people, even with every external success, feel hollow inside. Why societies rich in comfort are also plagued with depression. Why individuals repeat destructive patterns while claiming to not know why. The darkness is not the problem. The problem is forgetting how to face it. But if this is the root, what about the fruits? What happens to us, to our relationships, to our culture, when this darkness remains unacknowledged, unintegrated? What unseen consequences emerge from living in denial? To understand that, we must step out of theory and into the subtle daily ways our forgotten darkness shapes our lives. Think of a shadow cast in sunlight. You may pretend it is not there, avert your eyes, step carefully to avoid looking down. But the shadow remains, moving as you move, shaping itself in response to your every gesture. The same is true of the shadow within. It does not vanish when ignored. It adapts, it seeps, it speaks in whispers. And if you never face it directly, it rules you silently. The tragedy of forgetting the art of facing our own darkness is that the consequences do not strike suddenly, like a lightning bolt. They arrive quietly, subtly, infiltrating every corner of life, until one day you realize you are not living freely. You are being lived by the parts of yourself you refuse to acknowledge. The sabotage of relationships. How many relationships collapse not because of external forces, but because of unacknowledged shadows? The anger you deny leaks out in passive-aggressive remarks. The jealousy you bury surfaces as suspicion. The wounds from your past, unhealed and unseen, quietly dictate how much you trust, how much you love, how much you allow yourself to be vulnerable. Instead of confronting your own darkness, you project it onto others. You accuse them of the flaws you refuse to admit in yourself. You blame them for the emptiness you feel inside. The relationship becomes a battlefield, not because of who the other person is, but because of the ghosts you carry. The cycle of self-sabotage. When you avoid your darkness, you unknowingly create cycles of self-sabotage. Why do some people abandon opportunities just as they approach success? Why do others repeat destructive patterns in love or work, even while consciously longing for change? The answer often lies in the shadow. The unexamined fears, fear of failure, fear of rejection, even fear of success, live there, pulling strings behind the curtain. Until these fears are faced, you remain their puppet, enacting scripts you don't remember writing, anxiety and depression as symptoms. Our age of unprecedented comfort is also an age of unprecedented mental suffering. Why? Because comfort soothes symptoms while the shadow festers beneath. Anxiety often signals repressed fear or desire, energies that want expression but are forced into silence. Depression at its core can be the weight of unacknowledged grief, rage, or meaninglessness pressing down. By avoiding darkness, we condemn ourselves to live with its symptoms. Philosopher Soren Kierkegaard described despair not as mere sadness, but as the refusal to be oneself. Is that not what happens when we deny the shadow? We amputate half our being in order to appear whole. But the cost is despair. Projection and division in society. The consequences extend beyond the individual. When whole societies refuse to face their collective shadow, they fracture. Look at the rise of scapegoating, polarization, and hatred. Groups project their disowned qualities onto the other, painting them as evil, dangerous, inhuman. Carl Jung warned that what is denied inwardly reappears outwardly as fate. The wars, persecutions, and divisions of history can often be traced to a refusal of collective darkness. Instead of admitting this is within us, societies declare this is only in them. The result is endless conflict. Creativity stifled. Darkness is not only destructive, it is also fertile. Within the chaos of the shadow lies the raw material of creativity. Many artists, writers, and visionaries have drawn their genius from wrestling with inner darkness. Dostoevsky, Van Gogh, Sylvia Plath, all gave form to shadows most of us would flee. But for the average person, avoiding darkness means stifling creativity. You cannot access the full depth of imagination if you fear what lies beneath. You cannot paint the sky if you are terrified of the abyss. The illusion of a good self. Avoiding darkness forces us into rigid identities. We cling to being the good person, the rational one, the strong one. But these identities are masks, brittle and exhausting to maintain. Eventually, life cracks the mask. A crisis, a failure, a betrayal, and suddenly the shadow breaks through. People are shocked. I don't know what came over me. But it wasn't sudden. It was the long-suppressed darkness finally claiming its place. The ghost of regret. And perhaps the most haunting consequence is regret. A life lived in avoidance is a life half-lived. Imagine reaching old age and realizing you never spoke the truths that burned inside you, never expressed the anger that might have freed you, never embraced the desires that made you human. The shadow waits patiently. If not faced in youth, it returns in midlife as crisis. If not then, it appears in old age as the ghost of regret, whispering, "You were not whole. You never dared to see yourself." Culture of superficial light, zoom out, and you see an entire culture trapped in this avoidance. Self-help industries promising positivity without depth. Spiritual movements chasing light while dismissing shadow as negative energy. Social media curated into endless smiles, vacations, and filtered perfection. We live in a culture of false light, terrified of darkness. But just as a plant withers without roots in soil, the human spirit withers without grounding in shadow. Light without darkness is not illumination, it is blindness. The build-up of pressure, When darkness is denied, pressure builds. The psyche is like a vessel. It can contain only so much repression before cracks form. Some cracks emerge as addictions, others as breakdowns, others as eruptions of rage or violence. The longer darkness is ignored, the more catastrophic its eventual eruption. This is why Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Forgetting this truth guarantees that the darkness will return, louder, harsher, more destructive. The crossroads. So here we are. The unseen consequences of forgetting our darkness are everywhere. Fractured relationships, cycles of sabotage, anxiety and depression, social division, stifled creativity, hollow identities, regret. Individually and collectively, we pay the price of denial. But what if this price is not inevitable? What if the shadow does not have to destroy us, but can instead transform us? What if, instead of repression, we chose rebellion, the courageous act of turning toward the darkness, of facing what we fear most? The question now shifts. How can we break free from the tyranny of avoidance? How do we learn once again the forgotten art of confronting our own darkness? Rebellion does not always roar. Sometimes it begins with a whisper, a quiet refusal to keep living in denial. To break free from the tyranny of avoidance, you must learn to walk into the very places you have been taught to flee. This rebellion is not against society nor against others. It is against the false self you have built, the masks you wear, the illusions you cling to. It is the rebellion of turning toward your own darkness. The first step: radical honesty. The rebellion begins with honesty, not the polite honesty of daily conversation, but radical honesty with yourself. Sit in silence and ask, what am I hiding? What do I fear to admit, even in the privacy of my own mind? Perhaps it is resentment towards someone you are supposed to love. Perhaps it is envy of a friend you claim to admire. Perhaps it is the weight of a childhood wound, still bleeding beneath layers of denial. To admit these truths feels like betrayal of the good self you present to the world. But until you name them, they own you. Meeting the shadow without judgment. Carl Jung insisted that the shadow must be faced without judgment. To condemn it is only to deepen repression. To integrate it, you must sit with it, acknowledge it, listen to it, let it speak. This does not mean indulging destructive impulses, it means understanding them. Anger may be a messenger of violated boundaries. Envy may point to desires you have suppressed. Fear may signal parts of yourself longing to grow. The shadow is not merely a monster, it is also a teacher. Voluntary discomfort. Rebellion also means choosing discomfort voluntarily. For too long you have fled from pain. Now you must enter it deliberately. Not recklessly, but with courage. This might mean sitting with grief instead of numbing it with distraction. It might mean confronting a truth in therapy you've avoided for years. It might mean journaling the words you are ashamed to write, or having the difficult conversation you've postponed. Discomfort is the doorway, not the enemy. The practice of silence. In a world designed to distract, silence itself is an act of rebellion. To sit without screens, without noise, without escape, is to allow the darkness to surface. At first it feels unbearable. The mind races, the shadows press close. But stay. In silence, you begin to see the contours of what you have denied. Great spiritual traditions have always known this. Monks in deserts, shamans in solitude, mystics in meditation, all faced themselves in silence. They were not running from the dark. They were learning to see in it. Creating instead of consuming, the shadow is raw energy. If denied, it festers. If expressed destructively, it harms. But if harnessed, it fuels creation. Channel your rage into art, into writing, into action. Channel your envy into ambition. Let it reveal the life you secretly desire. Channel your fear into courage, using it as a compass, pointing to what matters most. History is filled with those who turn darkness into greatness. Dostoevsky transformed despair into novels of piercing depth. Frida Kahlo turned pain into paintings that still speak across generations. Their rebellion was not against their suffering, but against letting it destroy them. Saying no to false light. Rebellion also means rejecting the cultural lie that only light is good. Beware of the voices promising endless positivity, sanitized spirituality, or instant healing. These are not paths to wholeness, but escapes from depth. To say no to false light is to embrace paradox, that within you there is both beauty and brutality, compassion and cruelty, order and chaos. To be whole is not to be pure, it is to be complete. Community in darkness, facing the shadow, does not mean isolating yourself. In fact, true rebellion often requires others who are also willing to look inward. Imagine a conversation where masks are dropped, where pain is spoken aloud without shame. Imagine friendships where honesty is valued more than comfort, where vulnerability is not weakness, but strength. To gather in truth is itself a rebellion against a society addicted to performance. Redefining courage. Courage is often pictured as slaying dragons, but the greatest dragons live inside you. Real courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to enter it. To face your shadow is the most radical courage of all, for it demands that you risk dismantling the self you've carefully constructed. It demands that you step into chaos without guarantees of what will emerge. Yet this is the very condition for transformation. The cycle of descent and ascent. Ancient myths remind us that transformation requires descent. Inanna descended to the underworld and returned reborn. Dante wandered through hell before reaching paradise. Even Christ descended to death before resurrection. These myths echo the same truth. Rebellion against denial requires descent into darkness. But the descent is not the end. It is the passage. By facing the shadow, you prepare for ascent, rising not as the same person, but as one who has integrated, deepened, become whole. The risk and the reward. Make no mistake, this rebellion is dangerous. To look into your own darkness can unravel your illusions, unsettle your identity, destabilize your world. It may cost you relationships that were built on pretense, jobs that required masks, or beliefs that cannot survive scrutiny. But the reward is freedom. Freedom from being unconsciously ruled, freedom from cycles of sabotage, freedom to live not as a mask, but as a whole human being. Light and dark together, the bridge to the final realization. Breaking free is not the end, it is the threshold. For what happens after rebellion, after you confront your due? Darkness is something even deeper, a revelation that reshapes your understanding of life itself. The final realization is not simply that you can face your shadow, it is that within the shadow lies the very key to your becoming. That what you feared most is not your enemy, but your guide. Imagine walking into the cave you feared all your life. At first, it is suffocating. Shadows flicker, whispers echo. Every instinct screams at you to turn back. But step by step, you move deeper. Then, just when the darkness seems absolute, your eyes begin to adjust. Shapes emerge. Depth appears. And in the very place you expected to find only monsters, you find treasure. This is the paradox at the heart of the human soul. The darkness you fear most is the birthplace of your light. The integration of opposites. Carl Jung insisted that wholeness does not mean perfection. It means integration. You are not meant to amputate your shadow, nor to drown in it. You are meant to hold both sides of yourself, the noble and the base, the compassionate and the cruel, the order and the chaos, in one embrace. The ultimate truth is not that you must defeat your darkness, but that you must befriend it. To exile it is to live half a life. To embrace it is to live fully. Think of the yin-yang. Light contains a seed of dark. Dark contains a seed of light. Each gives meaning to the other. Without your shadow, your light has no depth. Without struggle, your triumph is empty. Without fear, courage does not exist. The gift, hidden in fear. What happens when you stop running from fear? You realize it is not a wall, but a compass. Fear points to what matters most. The fear of speaking truth reveals where your voice is needed. The fear of pursuing your dream reveals the path of your becoming. The shadow is not here to destroy you. It is here to guide you to the places you must grow. Like the dragon, guarding the treasure in myth, your darkness protects what is most precious, your potential. Freedom through responsibility. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that true freedom is terrifying because it places responsibility on your shoulders. To face your shadow is to accept this burden. You are not just a product of fate or others' actions. You are the author of your life. This is the ultimate freedom. To live without excuses, to stop blaming the world, to stop projecting your darkness outward, and to claim it as your own. It is heavy, yes, but it is also exhilarating. No longer a puppet of the unconscious, you stand as a creator. Transcendence in the abyss. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." The chaos he spoke of is the shadow, the untamed, dangerous energy within you. To face it is to risk losing yourself. But in that risk lies transcendence. For when you bring the chaos into form, you do not remain who you were. You become something greater, something freer, something alive with creative fire. This is why those who have endured great suffering often radiate depth. Their eyes carry storms, but also a light that the untested cannot know. They have faced the abyss and returned transformed. Death as ally. Arthur Schopenhauer and Viktor Frankl, though from different perspectives, both acknowledged the role of suffering and death in shaping life. Schopenhauer saw the will as endless striving, but Frankl discovered in Auschwitz that even in horror, meaning can be found. To face your shadow is also to face death, not literal death, but the death of illusions, masks, and comforts, and eventually the reality of mortality itself. Death is not merely the end. It is the reminder that life is finite, urgent, precious. When you embrace this, every moment sharpens, every choice deepens, every breath becomes sacred. Creativity and love. Reborn. When you integrate your darkness, you find that it does not diminish love, it deepens it. Only pas. By knowing your own anger can you forgive another's. Only by acknowledging your vulnerability can you offer true intimacy. Only by facing your mortality can you love without clinging. And creativity, once stifled by repression, flows again. From the depths of shadow come colors, words, melodies you could not have reached in the shallow waters of denial. The artist, the lover, the leader, they are all born in the crucible of darkness. The final realization. Here then is the ultimate truth. You are not meant to be pure light. You are meant to be whole. The forgotten art of facing your own darkness is not about destroying it, but about weaving it into your being. The anger you feared becomes your strength. The envy becomes your vision. The fear becomes your compass. The grief becomes your tenderness. Your darkness is not the opposite of your light. It is the soil in which your light grows. A poetic conclusion. One day, when you look back, you will not remember the years you spent avoiding yourself. You will remember the moments you dared to descend, the nights you faced your demons instead of running, the times you let the mask shatter and spoke the truth anyway. And you will see that those were not the darkest moments of your life, but the brightest, for they made you whole. The forgotten art is not forgotten forever. It waits, patient, in every soul, in every shadow. And when you finally turn inward, when you finally dare to look, you will find what was there all along. Not just darkness, not just light, but the vast, terrifying, beautiful fullness of being alive.